Loot Force 1 = RK = Part 7. Royal Palace. Feed. Naboo. Woolhuff. An explanation is in order, I reckon. A good one. The moment I could justify it, I dragged Dark into a secluded room near the audience chamber. I made sure no one could listen to us even if they tried, and focused my whole attention on my minion using every bit of enhanced senses that the Force could grant me. As far as I could tell without vivisecting his mind, Woolhuff was loyal. The altering I did back on Kamino was holding strong, and unless a powerful Force adept who really knew what they were doing got their hands on him, that wouldn't be changing. Figuring that out merely opened a new can of worms. How the criff did Tarkin pull of this stunt under my nose? Woolhuff returned my cold stare with the calm eyes. The bastard was actually amused by what was happening, even if he did feel a pang of fear. I did what I could within the boundaries I'm able to act. My lord. The last two words were clipped and chock-full with emotion. A spike of painful mixture made of reverence and utter contempt at what I did to him surged through his whole being before Tarkin regained control of his emotions and pushed them aside in a manner no Jedi of this age could ever hope to achieve. Couple of seconds later, all could feel coming from him was grim amusement at the situation, and Woolhuff began his explanation. I know enough of your goals to do my best pushing them forwards. I'm still loyal to Ariadu, however. The bastard actually had the gall and balls to smirk at me. All I've done was my best to protect my home while forwarding your agenda, my lord. I know if you find it useful you'll throw Ariadu away without a second thought. At best you'll regret the waste. Tonight, that's no longer the case. This alliance, if we can make it stick, will give you a real voice in the Senate. Along with Mandalore, if it's still around when we get there, could be the foundation of a new order that can finally fix this messed up galaxy. He spoke earnestly. There was no sign of deception I could detect. No hint of treason. Tarkin believed every word he told me. What's more, from his point of view it made sense. He was right. If push came to shove, I would have thrown Ariadu and the allies I made there to the wolves. Especially if I had to choose between helping them or Mandalore. However, this alliance he planned under my radar, it had a great potential. With Tarkin being in my pocket, if we could ensure that he was in the leading position of the Mid-Rim Alliance, it would guarantee me as much political control over them as possible at the foreseeable future. That was the one commodity I sorely lacked ever since I arrived in the future. For politics to work, connections were essential. Knowing the players, having personal connection with them, there was no substitute. Building such rapport, the alliances that came with it as well as the rivalries and enemies, it took years. Decades. There was a reason why my initial goals centered around either a reformed republic or utilizing Palpy's plan for an empire, preferably by placing myself as his obvious successor. As an outsider with the burden of being a Sith and now Mandalore, anything more would have been a pipe dream. That's why Palpatine getting himself gutted back on Coruscant was such a blow to my plans. I haven't had much time to contemplate all the consequences, but at the very best his death pushed back my long-term plans with years. Of course, Sidious's demise wasn't the only political blow I suffered. Some I did to myself. By becoming Mandalore I knew I would shoot myself in the leg in the short to medium term. However, the benefits of being head of state, and ally to the Republic and having an independent power base, no matter how vulnerable, were worth. The same was true for this alliance, and Tarkin, the bastard, knew it. The risk here was even greater, both military and political, yet the rewards, a success would make for a lot of the opportunities lost with Palpatine's death. If the Republic fragmented, the Mid-Rim Alliance, or whatever we ended up calling it, might very well prove vital for a victory over the Separatists. Perhaps. Might. Too many unknowns. This was no proper way to plan a campaign. It was chaos. It was a good thing that I've learned to thrive in such an environment a long time ago. Woolhuff, such an initiative and prudent thinking needs a reward. I smiled cheerfully at my minion and clasped his shoulder in a reassuring gesture. For some arcane reason Tarkin flinched and began radiating anxiety. You're going to be my point man for this alliance. You're going to deal with all those bloody bastards, make sure that they will follow through with supporting us fully. When, not if, but when, we secure this region of the Mid-Rim, you're going to officially take another hat as the face of this scheme. You'll be the one to sell it to the Senate when we're back to Coruscant. You, my dear friend, will have to ensure that all the local politicians will follow the party line and officially support our agenda, including our ultimate plans for the Republic. I'll do it, my lord. Tarkin nodded stiffly. I know you'll do it, Will Huff. A failure is not an option. I squeezed his shoulder. On the bright side, we have a lot of battles to win before you'll be dealing full-time with the political consequences of your stunts. You do have a plan? Tarkin asked hopefully. You don't? I inquired. This is your brainstorm after all. I smirked. I might have an idea or two. You'd better have more than that, especially when our logistics situation is concerned. I patted his back and took a step back. I think that our command will be called Loot Force 1. I beamed at Tarkin, who suddenly looked like he just bit into a particularly sour lemon. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I wiped any trace of cheer off my face. Looting our way to enough supplies to neutralize just the current separatist presence in the region will be a challenge. Ensuring we would have the fuel and ammunition to meet any counterattacks and then make our way to the core with a decent-sized fleet would be a significant challenge. We have just a day or two at best before we had to leave. Ideally we'll be on our way tomorrow evening, because giving any more time for the separatists to figure out what to do about us might very well prove fatal. I paused and made to leave the room. Tarkin, you'll run by me any scheme that has a chance of making complications for us before even thinking about implementing it, am I clear? I glowered at my minion. I will, my lord. To his credit, despite the sheer fear and disappointment at failing me in any way, shape or form that he felt, Tarkin held his ground and didn't flinch. =RK= Part 8. Bridge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Naboo. 36 hours. That's how long took us to make a kludge of a plan. It took too long. I had no doubt that by now the enemy was reinforcing critical positions against the off chance we raided important worlds nearby and preparing to attack Naboo again to pin our armada in place until our supplies ran out. It wasn't enough time to plan a proper campaign. Far from it. Considering our supply situation, everything was made much worse, because if we criffed up, soon our mighty fleets would be fit to only run for as long as their fuel lasted. If someone just went by numbers, the grand fleet I currently had at my disposal was one of the strongest forces in the galaxy. Nevertheless, while powerful, it was brittle and with limited endurance. That's why I decided to cheat again. Or at least try, on multiple levels at that. First, I made sure that Tarkin, who I made my liaison with the politicians on Naboo, presented the rough draft of an operations plan to every ambassador and head of state at the royal palace. It was a given that the contents would be leaked to the CIS and they would have a brief window of opportunity to prepare. What I did was a gamble. Unless my gambit worked, we might end up going with something quite similar that Tarkin presented and that had the potential for a disaster. Technically we took precautions by understating how bad our supply situation was and overstating what Eriadu could supply us with. According to the plan, the bulk of the fleet would smash its way back to Tarkin's home and resupply. Only then we would begin taking out every important enemy system in range, leaving Sullust, the toughest nut and biggest prize, for last, striking at it once we've reduced the amount of mobile assets the CIS could throw at us. Meanwhile, our allies were supposed to gather everything armed that flied at Naboo, along as many supplies as they could with few exceptions. Those were the major industrial systems still under friendly control, which were to retain their current garrisons. My commanders and even Tigellinus agreed that this plan was the only one having a prayer of working given our situation. They swore up and down in front of the politicians that this was the case. In reality, the odds of it working were quite low. Too much hinged of the CIS not figuring out that we were going to plunder everything we could. In reality, someone would catch up on our game too soon and implement scorched earth policy, and our war machine would stall for lack of ammunition. That's where I came in. What I intended was a gamble, a long shot that would be impossible for a regular force. After all, people couldn't change the realities of astrogation on a whim. To be fair, I couldn't do it too. What I could potentially pull off, if it was at all possible, was to use the Force to divine if there was currently available hyperspace route from Naboo to the real prize. Time was up. The armada gathered at Naboo split up into multiple fleets. Mine was Loot Force 1. I was taking the Freedom with me along with Joanna as an XO. We were going to hit the toughest nut and our success was essential. No matter how important their tasks, the rest of the fleets were distractions. Loot Force 2 I gave to Tarkin and enjoyed the way he grits his teeth every time he had to pronounce the name. He was going to hit Inark, the place where the Trade Federation staged their forces for their first invasion of Naboo 10 or so years ago. It was a staging ground today too, and Tarkin was going to trash it along with every enemy ship he could catch there. Tigellinus got Loot Force 3. He wasn't particularly happy with the whole scheme, not just the name of his new command. However, Rufan was a realist enough to know he didn't have much of a choice. Too many of the forces and system were likely to support me, especially once the alliance became a reality, at least on paper. He had his misgivings about the effects our stunt was going to have on the Republic, yet he agreed to join us in the end. I thought it was a combination of the possible rewards of a success and not wanting to be blamed for instigating a potential second civil war if he tried to go home with whatever forces decided to follow him. Besides, doing so would have criffed him and his family somewhat fierce if the Senate ended up endorsing our actions. Right now, he was in a position to blame everything on me if things went pear-shaped and even had a reasonable chance of pulling it off. Loot Force 4 I gave to Mandolin, and his target was on what after he and Tigellinus smashed Sanraf 6, a world we mostly bypassed on our rush to Naboo. Next was TF Aegis, which we left under the joint command of a clone Rear Admiral and Naboo's Royal Navy. Obviously their job was to keep the system as safe as practical. TF Broadsword was meant to hit Malastir and reinforce the Republic forces still fighting there. If practical, they were to get Jedi Master Adi Mundi and bring him so we could have a chat. The last we heard, he was on the ground there on the run from both sides. Last came TF Bastion. They would head for Ariadu and further fortify that system while it became a staging ground for supplies from all over the Western Quadrant. That was the plan anyway. Now it was time to see if it was going to die in the cradle. All forces are in position, General. We await your word. Joanna finally gave me the all clear. The fleets were ready. I was alone on the empty bridge, standing in front of one of the large windows. There was nothing gentle in what I did. I grabbed the Force and imposed my will upon her. The dark side erupted all over the empty compartment, and I felt a chill equal if not greater than the one outside. The stars shone at me with cold contempt as if mocking my efforts. My perception expanded until it surrounded Loot Force 1. I used all the people I could feel as an anchor and a beacon before I threw my awareness forward towards the distant dim dot that was Sullust. A human mind couldn't handle the necessary calculations, nor the sheer wealth of information that passed through my awareness as I drove myself towards my target. Everything was in motion: planets, stars, whole systems, and the galaxy itself. It was a complex system working on a scale vast beyond proper human comprehension. Even just the distance between a planet and its moon was so vast that most people couldn't really wrap their heads around them. The distance within a star system? Even less could understand it deep down. That between the stars? Feeling the gulf that made up most of our galaxy was a humbling experience. Only being deeply submerging into the Force and processing everything through her allowed me to comprehend the sheer scale without my mind breaking. Was it minutes, hours, or even days? Time had no meaning. That was an invention that galaxy didn't know or care about. There was distance, gravity, solar winds. I could feel them all, and eventually I could divine a route among the constantly dancing star systems between Naboo and Ariadu. Now time finally began to matter. The stars would align soon and we could jump for the first leg of our journey. 3 more and we would reach Sullust, avoiding any blocking enemy force that could intercept us and doing the impossible. I let go of the Force and in a distant tone began to rattle the hyperspace coordinates of our destination. What I didn't know was what awaited us at the end of our journey. Was I leading this fleet to victory or into a cauldron where the Confederation could finally pin us in place and destroy us? A part of me couldn't help it but eagerly await the confrontation. That was the warrior I became on Korriban. Barras tempered me later, and Zash finished the job with her Inquisitor training I received later. That, along with every shred of experience I had as an officer, screamed at me that this was an insane risk I was taking. That I should reconsider. Calculations complete, General. We're ready to proceed. Joanna broke my glum thoughts. This is General Vale. Jump now, I ordered. The dice was thrown. Was this my madness talking? Did it finally slip its leash? I smiled. I was a Sith. By the reckoning of any normal being, my very existence was madness. My morals, my mindset, my goals, and the price I would extract from the galaxy for them, they were evil, immoral, insane. I chuckled at that thought. So what if I was mad? So what if I would see the galaxy burn for power? So what if I lay waste to a large part of it, if doing so might mean no one ever dares harm Bo again? It was very much true, and it didn't matter. Sanity was overrated anyway. Loot Force 1 equals RK equals. Interlude, Historical Notes. Sanraf 6. Sullust. Iriadu. Naboo. 4 worlds, 4 battles that ultimately decided the fate of the Mid-Rim Alliance. I can assure you, at the time it didn't look that way. Tarkin succeeded at Enoch. His arrival caught the Separatists their off position when they were massing for a presumed raid at Naboo. While his Loot Force 2 suffered heavy casualties in the resulting fighting, Tarkin managed to wrestle space superiority over the enemy, loot as many supplies as his surviving ships could carry, and then retreat to Naboo. No matter how you look at it, tactically or strategically, Enoch was a mixed bag at best. Yes, Tarkin took out a respectable number of enemy ships, yet he was in no position to touch most of the industry in the system. Malastair, TF Broadsword was the most successful of us all. It linked with the Republic elements still fighting there, broke the stalemate that persisted for more than a month, and secured the system with light losses in space. Surviving industry and supplies, along with those salvaged from destroyed ship from both sides, proved vital in holding Naboo after I came close to single-handedly dooming the Alliance. Sanraf 6. That battle still haunts me. When I led Loot Force 3 and TF Bastion there, I expected a lot of things might happen. However, even my worst-case predictions didn't come close to the hell I found there. And to think that the battle began in such a promising manner. When we arrived in system, there were 2 separatist battle groups we could detect, along with the local SDF. 300 ships, most of them frigates. While I commanded roughly 2/3 of the force that gathered at Naboo before Vale's arrival, that still left me comfortably outnumbering and outgunning the enemy for once. Even the multiple stations in orbit around Sanraf 6 weren't enough to address the balance of power. Most of them were civilian after all. To this day I don't know if the Separatists planned the whole thing as a trap or not. Did the fleets that arrived to trap us around Sanraf 6 came just because that system was a logical staging ground for a strike at Naboo? What I do know is that I was arrogant that day. Our initial successes emboldened me. We smashed through 1/3 of the enemy mobile forces before the rest could regroup and concentrate to oppose us. I gave the order to launch the boarding parties at various supply depots in orbit of Sanraf 6, which came under cover of our Guardian systems. I sent parties to try capturing various ships stocked at 4 civilian stations, both military and civilian alike. It was 15 minutes later that the first Separatist fleet came calling. Number-wise it wasn't too threatening, a mix of 120 munificent and recusants acting as escorts for 5 battleships and a smattering of Providence dreadnoughts. Even when combined with the enemy ships already in system, we still had a decent advantage in firepower if no longer in numbers. Besides, I did have my mission, to neutralize the space stations at Sanraf 6 and loot enough supplies to make the strike there worth it. I issued what orders I deemed necessary, our formation reformed into a defensive posture, and our ground complement continued assaulting their targets. For the next hour or so the situation remained stable. The Separatists probed our formation multiple times, including 2 determined attacks that we beat off with acceptable casualties concentrated in our light elements. That's when another enemy fleet exited hyperspace behind us and moved to box us in against the planet. It was smaller than the first, yet more powerful. 53 munificents, 11 recusants, 15 Providence dreadnoughts and 20 battleships. Those were the survivors of the sector fleet we smashed at Naboo when General Vale arrived. They had picked up some friends too, because while the number of escorts did match, they had double the number of Lucre hulks. Looking back, I don't know what possessed me to think that I could still complete my original mission considering the changed tactical situation. Perhaps if my forces weren't pinned in place in order to cover the ground troops. If I hadn't been so arrogant as to think that we could withstand everything they could throw at us. There was a method to my madness. I still keep saying that to myself. From time to time I even believe it. The forces we fought until the second reinforcement fleet arrived were standard fare for the Separatists. They acted with the precision of machines, however their tactical abilities were nothing to write home about. The same could be said for the fleet we engaged at Naboo for the past month. No one on our side knew it at the time, however what we faced were second-line forces. They hadn't received the software and in some cases hardware upgrades that those thrown at Camino and the Corps got. Not until Vale reappeared. I guess I should be thankful that only those 10 new Lucree hulks were upgraded, so they were bad enough. If the whole enemy fleet was able to act with that level of coordination and tactical ability, I have no doubt that San Raf 6 would have turned into a total disaster. To ride the hurricane. Grand Moff Rufantigelinus biography. =RK=. Part 9. Were you to blame? Blame? How do you assign blame for something like the Black Rebellion? The quotation marks were easy to hear. Such a pretentious name. Ever since the Clone Wars formally ended, many analysts began to blame General Vale as one of the people responsible for the rebellion. Oh, you can accuse the general of many sins. The Black Rebellion? That's not one of them. However, I can see where those armchair generals and admirals are coming from. The first two confirmed instances of fully networked and updated separatist ships came from the Midrim just after we began our offensive to liberate the regions surrounding Naboo. That's correct. I've met many experts who claim that it was General Vale's actions that drove the separatists into taking insane risks with the programming of their war droids. Perhaps we were quite effective. It's certainly possible that the excessive networking along with the software updates and hardware upgrades the separatists implemented could have been a response to the general's actions ever since Geonosis. We do know that those actions were directly responsible for the Black Rebellion. What I fail to grasp is how any of that is our responsibility. We did what foot soldiers do, we won as often as we could while doing our best to minimize our casualties. Not enemy casualties? Please. We both know better. Doing so is a luxury that we couldn't often afford. Sullust? Sullust. That's what you really want to ask about, isn't it? There we faced them for the first time. Even with the general's battle meditation. Joanna grimaced. Your actions there were, still are in fact, highly polarizing. Besides, we do know for sure that it was the outcome of that battle that led to the separatists upgrading a large part of their droid armies. So Sullust? Why? Isn't it obvious? We had to neutralize that system. It contained too many resources we needed to appropriate, industry that had to be disrupted or destroyed if practical. If that was all you did there, could you honestly call what happened a victory? Victory, you say? There are a lot of ways I can characterize Sullust. It wasn't an outright disaster. But a victory? From an interview between Victoria Halcyon and Fleet Admiral Joanna Holt, taken for the first anniversary of the Clone Wars conclusion. =RK=. Flag Bridge. Cis Dreadnought Starcrusher. Sullust. Admiral Kirst did his best to ignore the unease he felt. After Camino, he was the only organic commander left in 2nd Fondor Sector Fleet. He still often awoke drenched in cold sweat with the screams of a dying world echoing in his ears. He knew he handled whatever happened out there better than his subordinates, but that was a cold comfort. It let him retain his post and he was beginning to regret it. Kirst was in the nerve center of his fleet, surrounded by his staff. All of them were soulless machines, droids, which with every passing day behaved less and less like the smart equipment they were supposed to be. It was an eerie feeling. We have hubs installed in every major combatant across the fleet. Software and hardware upgrades are being installed when droids come in for maintenance. TK-51 reported in an odd tone. If the Admiral didn't know better he could have sworn that the machine radiated smug satisfaction. Still on schedule then? Yes, sir. His EXO ever since Camino, a super tactical droid, confirmed. At least that particular machine sounded like a regular droid. His SFSF was still far from fully upgraded. All Lucree Hulks and Providence Dreadnoughts along with the other command ships had the network hubs on. That would substantially increase their effectiveness in combat, at least according to simulations and the few limited tests conducted before Camino. However, the system wasn't perfect yet and it had its glaring flaws. Flaws like the too smart for comfort droids gathered around the tactical table mounted on the left side of the large flag bridge. Do we finally have permission to go after Vale? Kirst asked the important question. That was the reason why he and his fleet was stationed at Sullust, so they could be in a better position to continue their hunt. Unfortunately, after he disappeared after Camino, the SFSF got reorganized. A lot of ships were pulled out for repairs or to reinforce various battle groups conducting operations across the sector. In exchange he got the Starcrusher back after the ship was pulled from under his feet in order to receive Umbrella upgrade handful of weeks after he got command of it in the first place. While by itself the dreadnought wasn't a match for Vale's flagship, with the core of upgraded capital ships SFSF finally got assigned to it over the past couple of weeks, a victory with acceptable losses should be possible. That was SFSF's current mission, yet after the Sith finally surfaced and hit Darknall, Kurst didn't receive a permission to pursue. Command deemed the distance too large and ordered him to wait until they saw what way Vale would take towards the core, his presumed target. Only then, once blocking forces could be mustered to slow down the Sith, SFSF would engage. Instead of doing the same thing and retreating, Vale chose to go on the offense. Inark and Sanraf 6 were assaulted 5 hours ago, yet no one reported Vale's flagship. In fact, there were too few ships in those two Republic forces to account for the combined armada that secured Naboo a few days ago. Sanraf 6 was under counterattack already, yet there was still no sign of the Sith. Where did he go? Was he using those attacks as diversions to cover his retreat? That sounded like something a Sith might do. Such a stunt certainly wouldn't surprise Kurst after Kamino. He knew the truth. Vale murdered that world for some reason, no matter it was strategically important for the Republic. Such a man would do anything to achieve his goals. That at least was something to respect. It also made Vale much harder to predict than anyone else on the other side. =RK=. Bridge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Hyperspace. Why? Why are you doing this? T demanded. Even your delusions don't explain it. What are you babbling about now? I grumbled in exasperation. After Iriadu she's been mostly pleasantly quiet. I had enough time to examine your memories in detail and to reflect on them. You could have defected to the Old Republic. You could have exposed Sidious. Perhaps. I allowed. It was technically possible to do either of those things, though it was a moot point now. You could have made the galaxy a better place. You could have opposed the Sith. You could have stopped the Clone Wars. I know that you aren't a puppet for the dark side. Why do you serve it anyway? T screamed at me and incomprehension vibrated within each word. Honestly? It was fear at first. I didn't want to die, much less by being made an example of by the Sith at the Academy. I admitted. Those questions brought me back at the beginning. Anger. The Old Republic threw away the best chance it had to win. They signed a peace treaty with the Empire after the sack of Coruscant. It was proof enough that as a nation they lacked the backbone to win. I hated them for it. That single action made the hell I was put through on Korriban pointless. That's it? Her disbelief echoed through my mind. Power. I ignored her outburst. Do you have any idea what it is to be a slave? To be powerless at the mercy of people who had no concept of the word? I hissed. When I thought about those days. Hell, I didn't even know if it really happened or if I was placed into this galaxy just after I manifested enough fury to awake my force powers and tear apart my owner. It didn't really matter. When I thought about those times, I could still feel the slave collar around my neck, fixed tight enough that I could never forget it was in place. I could still feel it lighting up my nervous system on fire when I disobeyed or just for kicks, even if that pain couldn't ever compare to discipline in the Academy. Precisely. You knew firsthand what monsters the Sith were. You experienced it, yet you went on to become one of the Empire's best. What that power gave you. Ashara? You would have met her if you joined the Old Republic. You could have spent your lives together, T exclaimed. Her passion was so unlike our usual behavior that it took me aback. You saw my memories, T, I snapped. Despite everything the Sith did to me, they gave me the tools to set myself free. What could the Jedi offer me? A gilded cage at best? In the Order I would have been as much a slave as if that kerfing collar was still around my neck. You know that isn't true. T countered. Neither then nor now. You would have had to follow the Order's rules, true. You would have been no less free then than you are now. We don't condone slavery. Open your eyes, Vale. My eyes are wide open, T. You should open yours. No attachments. Putting the good of a nation I care nothing about in front of my desires? Become a tool of a cause I don't believe in? Why I would ever do any of that? Listen to yourself. Whatever gave you such an idea, I would never know. And even if it was the case, would it be so bad? How many people did you slaughter for a cause you didn't believe in? How many species you exterminated because the Empire demanded it? How many people you tortured because you were ordered to? How can you justify your actions to yourself? Easy. I told you already, T. Power. Raw, Pure power. That's what the Empire, the Sith offered for my soul. That power freed me. Don't you get it? Morals? Justice? Right and wrong? None of that matter unless you have power. What use is a justice if you lack the strength to defend it? Does it matter that your cause is right if you lose and your enemy triumphs? I snorted. I don't need to justify myself to anyone, much less you, T. Not to me. I can see you dreams, you know. I stiffened. I see you above Camino. I could feel the little part within you that screamed in horror when you ordered another world to burn. I know you were a decent man once, Del Qatar. I know you had morals and compassion. I know you had conscience. You weren't just another power-hungry madman. You weren't a psychopath who could feel no empathy. Why? T demanded. I sighed. She really didn't get it, did she? You can't comprehend it even if it's in front of your eyes. I shook my head. Do you know what power is there in mastering yourself? In freeing yourself from all shackles? Morality? Conscience? The approval of society? They're all meaningless in the end. I would rather rule in hell than be puppet in heaven, T. That's the choice I made back in the day. I do have regrets, many of them, but becoming a Sith isn't one. The Sith, as flawed as they were, showed me the way. Why should I serve when I can be free to do what I wish? Why would I join an order that tried to exterminate my kind multiple times in the past because they were afraid of what we represent? In the murky depths of my mind, T flinched. She was afraid of me, yet that didn't deter her. Will you continue to tell yourself such soothing lies? I know you hate what you did at Camino, at Undren and Balmorra. Why are you going to butcher your way through Sullust? There has to be another way. Why do you persist going on with this madness? Why not? Because it's immoral? Evil? The dark side took care of that. Thanks to her, I could torch entire worlds and not only live with it but enjoy the act. Doing so would empower me too. This is power, true freedom. Camino died because it served my agenda. Sullust will burn for the same reason. I can choose not to do it, you know. I could restrain myself. I have that freedom, which wouldn't be the case if I was constrained by laughable notions of morality, of right and wrong. I am free to act no matter what my conscience tells me. For this kind of freedom, for this kind of power, I would gladly see the galaxy burn again. I trailed off. You can't comprehend it, can you, T? This isn't the dark side speaking. Just me. You're insane, T declared in a stunned voice. Are you going to call me monster now? You would be right, you know, I chuckled. Insane. By whose standards? I do consider myself a monster, you know. However, that's by my own standards. What right do you have to judge me, T? What right does anyone has to do so? Attention all hands, ETA to Sullust, 10 minutes. Man your stations. The captain's voice echoed throughout the bridge. Historical notes. =RK equals. How did the Republic fall? It's easy to blame the obvious culprits, separatists, Jedi, Sith, selfish senators and governments. They all must shoulder the blame. We could endlessly debate how our galaxy would change if one of those factions acted differently. If they were more reasonable or luckier. The Republic's ultimate fate wasn't sealed when the Clone Wars began. There wasn't a single act that led to its fall. It was a gradual process that began long before that infamous conflict. Examining history, we could argue that the seeds of the fall were sown as far back as the Ruusan Reformation. Perhaps even earlier, in one of the previous iterations of the Republic. If we look dispassionately at the formation of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, when we examine the reasons why so many worlds joined the Separatists, we would find a number of facts that would be disturbing for many a Republic loyalist. The few systems in the core that supported the secessionist movement did it for reasons not dissimilar to their IM counterparts. Issues with tariffs, taxes and the services the Republic was meant to offer in exchange. There were also disagreement over policy with the Senate, but ultimately those three were the major reasons why the Separatists movement became so popular. A number of senators hurried to accuse anyone even entertaining thoughts of supporting the secessionist movement in greed and corruption, which to be honest weren't entirely unfounded. However, the heart of the matter ran much deeper than most people back then realized. In that regard, the situation today isn't much different. All across the galaxy, people either idealize the Republic or see it as the reason for all the strife following the Clone Wars. It is ironic then, that few actually understand what the Republic was. If we're to examine the reasons why the Republic fell, first we need to answer one vital question: what was the Republic? It was often described as the cradle of interstellar civilization, a bastion of freedom and liberty. At the same time, the Senate was often perceived as a den of corruption rivaling the worst places in Hutt space. It was the sole superpower in the galaxy for 1,000 years. All of those descriptions are at least partially true, yet they miss the point. When people talk about the Republic, they usually see it as a monolith structure, one that was more than the sum of its parts. While such a description is technically correct, it misses the point. The Republic. It wasn't a nation. It never was. Arguably, it could never be. There always were significant cultural differences between its members, compounded by the way different species perceive the world. At its core, the Republic was an agreement between governments. Those governments ceded certain amount of power to the Republic in exchange for various benefits. Protection, free travel and trade, all facilitated by common currency. In exchange, the Republic received taxes from its members to pay for all the above. This is it. Those deceptively simple agreements were the foundations upon which the Republic was built by our ancestors. At the beginning it worked, and the benefits were enough to ensure that the Republic would not only preserve but prosper and expand. How did such agreements grow up into the Republic we knew? This work would answer those questions before we continue examining the reasons why the decline of the Republic happened and how it made the Clone Wars or another similar conflict all but inevitable. One of the biggest flaws of the Republic, it was the way it was set up from the beginning. It wasn't meant to become a nation, for it was built of nations which until the end fiercely defended their interests. That was a feature of the system meant to prevent a tyrant from gaining too much power, or for that matter for the Republic itself having too much of a say in the affairs of its members. For 1,000 years it worked. However, when the Clone Wars began, this vital foundation of the Republic turned into one of the primary reasons for its fall. Independent worlds and systems looked for their protection first. They hoarded resources, including their system defense fleets. The individual members demanded protection as it was their right, for protecting its members was one of the most important function of the Republic. Yet, that was a function that the Republic was incapable of meeting. Peace has reigned for a millennium. For hundreds of years there was no credible threat for the Republic as a whole, and slowly but steadily funding for the military dried up until all that was left in the last few centuries were just the Jedi and judicial forces. The latter were incapable of facing any threat more serious than the odd pirate. In theory that wasn't a big issue. The Republic had the right to request forces from its member states if circumstances demanded it. In practice, when the Clone Wars began and every threatened system cried for help, only the secret clone army was available to help. It took weeks of haggling and deals for any significant forces to be released from the individual members' SDFs, and even then both the absolute number of hulls and the percentage of the forces technically available was minimal. The consequences were predictable. When the GAR implemented their contingency plans in preparation for the Separatist offensive in the core and recalled as much of their navy as possible from strategically unimportant systems, it was the right military decision. Most historians and military analysts agree that considering the strategic situation, it was the only decision the Republic military could make unless they were prepared to lose the war then and there. A nation could have weathered the storm. During the war we saw it again and again when individual cities and provinces on scores of planets had to be ceded so their defenders could consolidate and one day liberate their compatriots. However, the same principle didn't apply to the Republic as a whole. When individual systems were abandoned to their fate, their people and governments had to ask a few simple questions. What use is the Republic when it couldn't protect us the first time a war happened? Why did we pay all those taxes? Why should we suffer for a Republic that abandoned us? Why should we have any loyalty to those who betrayed us? The Fall of the Galactic Republic by Lillian Solo. First edition, Corellia. An Alliance Born in Fire. =RK=. Part 1. Bridge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. 2 light seconds above Solomon. Sullust System. Our arrival wasn't spectacular. The fleet re-entered real space with the local star to our side and immediately accelerate towards our first objective. ECM fed by gargantuan reactors surged to life and flooded the surrounding space with screeching jamming and siren song of false images. By the time nearby civilian and military ships could raise a warning, my fleet was already on its way to the closest of Solomon's 18 moons. Warning of our arrival was spreading across the system, just as planned. Soon the perceived purpose of our visit would be announced for all to see too. The first sensor sweep noted the position of everything larger than a light freighter on our side of the gas giant. The data was examined, targets chosen. Weapons crews across the fleet followed my orders to the letter. They locked in all available targets and concussion missiles left their launchers. Next were the gunnery crews on the Freedom. They gleefully targeted her longer-range turbo lasers and unleashed hell upon the moon we were approaching. Meanwhile, ready recon flights launched to locate the separatist fleet meant to defend the system. Before the enemy's garrison could reply in adequate fashion, Sullust's industry began to burn. Warheads meant to gut capital ships expended their fury upon extraction plants, refineries and storage facilities. Mines and processing plants across Solomon's moon simply vanished in flashes of light. In 3 separate cases, 10 capital missile strikes in close successions were more than enough to destabilize the small planetoids housing their targets. Shock waves, earthquakes and tidal surges tore apart those moons, throwing their mass in Solomon's planetary system like tremendous shotgun blasts. Lorena, the first target for the Freedom's guns, ignited when all the Tabana gas storage facilities upon the surface went up in a chain reaction. That moon, one of the few with fully breathable atmosphere in this system, wouldn't stop burning long after we left. Millions died and we had scarcely begun. Freighters tried to escape. Few even succeeded to enter hyperspace before frigate packs, bombers or torrent squadrons heavy with proton torpedoes flew upon them like the hammer of an angry god. The bait was in place. Now it was time to see if my separatist counterpart would bite. == Flag Bridge. Confederate Dreadnought Suncrusher. Sullust. When the attack came, Admiral Kirst was temporarily gripped by indecision. Was this merely a diversion meant to draw him away from Sullust and its shipyards? His current position was reasonably secure. The planet and its fixed defenses were at his back, and they all were surrounded by a large asteroid bay that significantly reduced the vectors of approach towards Sullust. If he stood his ground, Kirst could guarantee that the most important industry in the system would be all but invincible. Star Dreadnought presence confirmed within the enemy fleet. One of the droids acting as the Admiral's staff reported. A savage smile appeared on Kirst's face. His target actually came knocking. The fleet will assume starburst formation. Plot intercept course through a hyperspace jump. Every battle group is to activate full networking capabilities, Kirst ordered. Then he had to wait and listen as report after report came in of gutted industry. The local government began screaming at him with demands to do something, and he ignored them. His fleet broke into 6 sub-formations, made a jump above the asteroid field and maneuvered so every ship could point its prow in the direction of the enemy. Kirst sneered. The Republic fleet began turning towards them. It wouldn't help them. He had the numbers and firepower to match the enemy, and the full network integration of the droids under his command would give him enough of an advantage to win. He hoped. Even now, when battle was about to be joined, Kirst couldn't help it but feel uneasy at how much he had to rely on the droids. He made the plan. Now it was up to the machines to execute it, making him a glorified observer. This wasn't a proper way to wage a war. Admiral, Spearpoint reports critical damage to 3 of Solomon's moons. A tactical droid brought Kirst's attention back to the tactical plot. There 3 of the blue spheres surrounding the gas giant blinked crimson. As he watched, one of them blinked one final time, then its image was replaced by an expanding sphere of debris. The other 2 moons followed suit less than a minute before Kirst's fleet was ready to jump into battle. Griff. The Admiral hissed. Everyone was going to blame this on him. He had to win here or his career was over. Kirst's eyes went for the Freedom. Killing that ship and the Sith it carried, that would wash off any perceived sins. The fleet's individual battle groups flashed green one after another. They were all in position. Proceed. The Freedom is the primary target. Kill that ship no matter the cost. Launch all fighters only when we are about to enter point-blank range. For a brief moment the tactical plot froze while the fleet made a short jump through hyperspace, then they were back not too far from Lorena, one of Solomon's moons. The individual battle groups were converging on the enemy fleet, which was already unfolding into a sub-formations of its own. Missiles slammed into the leading elements of 2 of Kirst's task forces, biting large chunks of munificence before their umbrella systems could react. The Confederate fleet acted as a single hive-minded organism. At least a dozen ships targeted a single enemy craft and their weapons spoke with coordination and precision impossible for organics. Kurst knew that victory was inevitable. His forces could concentrate their fire and kill the enemy better than the Republic crews could imagine in their worst nightmares. That's why he was astounded when the enemy responded in kind and their first coordinated barrages came screaming mere seconds after the Confederacy opened fire. Kurst felt his courage leaving him. More despair than a human mind could handle descended upon him. His bowels turned into water and he stared at the plot through unseeing eyes. A concerned tactical droids came to check on him, while the rest of the machines continued to fight to the best of their abilities, caring not for the breakdown of their organic commander. They had their orders, they had their mission, and the enemy was under the barrels of their guns. And on the bridge of his flagship, for the first time TK-51 wondered what use were his organic commanders.